Hello, and welcome to the Creators Guild podcast, where we talk about all things creative. I'm Chris Howell, and with me,
Jared Lovelady.
and today we're going to begin as we always do at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start, and that start always is we're going to read from A Flight from Shadows. So today we're on chapter 18. Once again, if you don't have your copy of A Flight from Shadows, go track it down, find it, get it on Amazon, get it in hard copy like this, or get the ebook. Go check it out. And we are on today, like I said, we're beginning chapter 18, Another Threat. Cycle of Aelith, year 12182. How many times can one being be thrown to the ground before they no longer have the will to rise again? My heart would not allow me to watch her face such fear alone. Journal of Athandra Koviat, 16th day of the cycle of Aelith, year 12182. 2 weeks had passed since the meeting with Captain Ethrin. Since that time, Athandra had tried everything she could think of to win Tawara over. She found Tawara bright and curious, but very naive. It was as though she had been kept in a box her entire life. She knew almost nothing of the world outside her house or the province in which her father ruled. She also had a deep bitterness toward life. She was mistrustful and slow to share her true thoughts or feelings. It was beyond frustrating. But what could Athandra do? The princess did not trust her. Tawara seemed to always wear a mask, even when she tried to sneak away from her lessons. That was something Athandra had caught her trying to do several times in her short stint as Tawara's instructor. The day following the events at the Trekken market, Corvin had left Tradoc. Tawara had wanted to confront him that morning. Upon learning he was gone, she slipped away from Athandra. It was only by chance that a servant in the house had seen Tawara going to the stables. When Athandra found her, Tawara stood in a stall, crying against the shoulder of a large white horse. "My lady," Athandra asked as she approached. Tawara's head snapped up at the sound. "You found me, I see," she said with a bitter chuckle. "Do not worry. I will not ride away. I do not wish anyone else's death on my conscience." "My lady, are you all right?" Athandra asked, stepping up to the low stall door. Tawara looked at the horse's neck, at dark spots created by her tears. "This is Cloud," she said as though to herself. "He was Traylin's horse. She was the first one to have the fire lit under her at the market. He's a good mount, a bit large for me, but very gentle." She rubbed his muzzle gently as she spoke. Athandra felt her heart skip a beat at the pain in Tawara's voice. "If I had only stayed at the house that day and gone to my lessons, I would not have met Traylin, who hated me for thinking I wanted to challenge her love interest, or seen Megrith and her calm, friendly smiles, or Fram with his stupid wit and boyish crush on me. I would not have seen Jaffram again. But he and Traylin would still be alive, and Meg and Fram would not be sentenced to death in the mines. I would not have lost two dear friends whom I have known since they were children, before they ever grew up and married, and even got old and fat, and treated me like I was a long-lost daughter to spoil and dote on." She shook her head, and more tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. With a shudder, she wiped the tears from her face and turned to face Athandra, her eyes going cold. "I suppose my riding days are over for some time, now that I have a nursemaid to watch over my every move, and the threat of death to anyone I may inadvertently befriend, not to mention assassins who could be lurking behind every bush or tree." Tawara pushed past her out the stall door with no word of apology or acknowledgment for her rude behavior. Athandra did not let herself rise to the bait. She turned and followed the princess back to the manor house to her next scheduled lesson. That evening, as Athandra lay in bed, she considered what to do. How could she get through to Tawara? What did she need? The idea had come to her all at once. She was the handmaid for the princess-elect. As such, she had been given responsibility over a portion of Tawara's tutelage, and had some authority to control her lesson schedule. That control just might give her the space she needed. The next morning Athandra went to Tessera with a revised schedule for Tawara's lessons. She knew her plan may be met with opposition, but it was worth a try. The princess had a need, and it was part of her new position to fill that need, if she were able. "This is highly unorthodox, Athandra," Tessera had remarked when reviewing the lesson plan. "So is my being here, Tessera," Athandra had replied. Athandra could tell the older one liked to use her authority in the house when she could, but Athandra had been given clear authority when it came to making changes in particular aspects of Tawara's training as she saw fit. Very well, but if any negative consequences arise, the blame will be placed squarely on your head. Tessera had warned her, as though Athandra did not know that already. Did Tessera consider her a dolt? She left Tessera and made her way to Tawara's rooms. When Tawara opened her door, Athandra was there waiting. Good morning, my lady, Athandra said cheerfully, striding past Tawara into the antechamber. Why are you coming unto my rooms, Athandra? Is there some reason for this breach of propriety? I do not have a lesson with you until this afternoon. Kindly exit and do not enter again without being granted permission. Oh, my apologies for the perceived impropriety, and I am sorry to contradict you, my lady, but your lesson schedule has been altered. You now have a lesson with me this morning. When I am acting as your handmaid, I must follow the rules of proper etiquette pertaining to your chambers. As your instructor, however, no such rules apply. We are well past the appointed hour for your morning lessons to begin. Therefore, I am within the rules of etiquette to enter your antechamber without your leave. Tawara's face was a mask of confusion and frustration. Why was I not informed of the changes? I am, after all, the one who needs to keep my schedule, or are you going to do that from now on, to keep me in line? Again, I apologize. Your new lesson schedule had to be approved by Tessera, and I was unable to do that until this morning. And officially, as your handmaid, it is my responsibility to keep your schedule for you. Tawara rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. Very well, Athandra. What is it we shall be discussing this morning? I assume the lesson plan has changed along with the schedule? Oh, not at all, my lady. We will still be discussing the history of the Fourth Drow Treaty and with the Kuvian realm. What has changed is the venue. I'm afraid you will have to change out of that dress and into something more appropriate as well. What are you talking about? Tawara balked. Why would I need to change? Athandra, who had been garbed in a light overcoat until now, removed it to reveal tight riding breeches and a waist-length jacket. Stout knee-high riding boots complemented the ensemble. You may wear your dress if you wish. I will leave that up to you. But I find sitting on a horse much more pleasant when dressed appropriately. Don't you? But Tawara said, as she uncrossed her arms, pointing to Athandra's clothing. Are you trying to trick me into something? Are you trying to get me into trouble? I cannot go riding. You know what happened when I left without permission last time. I just cannot. Her voice had taken on an edge of desperation. Not at all, my lady. I am simply changing how things will be done where your lessons are concerned. From now on, your first lesson of the day will be given while we ride. As far as getting into trouble, that brings us to the rules of this novel approach. First off, we will be staying within the bounds of the manor house and its immediate grounds. Second, you must stay within earshot of me at all times. It would do no good to have you off so far you could not hear what is being taught. Finally, as far as permission goes, you have it, so long as you follow those rules. Are these terms acceptable? Tawara stared into Athandra's green eyes, as though searching for some tell of deception. Yes, it is acceptable, she finally said, her voice less than confident. You must hurry then, my lady, Athandra said. We have the first quarter of the day. We must return in time for midday meal, and be cleaned up and ready for afternoon lessons. The sooner you are ready, the sooner we can be on our way. As Tawara left the antechamber, Athandra smiled. She could tell Tawara was trying to put on a stern face, but she could not hide the smile that had begun to twitch the corners of her mouth, or the rapid pace at which she left the room to change clothes. That was how it had started. Athandra had no idea where this new approach would lead. The first day had been far more riding than teaching. Despite Athandra's best efforts and Tawara's assurances of the horse's tame nature, Cloud had been far too unruly a beast. Perhaps it was due to the size of the animal. He was much larger than the horses found in the Wood Elf realm. They rode every morning, the weather allowed. As each day passed, she made small improvements in controlling Cloud and was able to focus more on the lessons. She considered herself a proficient rider. It must have been the Trekkan style of training horses was different from that of the Wood Elves. Their saddles and tack were certainly not what she was used to. In the hours they spent in lessons, Athandra learned that Tawara showed the most interest when learning things that bordered on rebelliousness. She was most attentive to history surrounding clashes with Wooders, rebellions by the Drow, or conflict with the humans, either in Perome or the Confederation of Brundia. This was no issue for Athandra. She quite liked those subjects herself, and had dedicated a good deal of her own educational pursuits to knowledge that was debarred to the high elves, particularly those in high houses. In her many years as a tutor, a princess-elect was the highest-ranking student of which Athandra had been given charge. Beyond that, Tawara was likely the brightest pupil she had ever taken on. She had been told of Tawara's intelligence, yet no one had made mention of the princess's naivety. Tawara could quote entire passages from books after having only read them once, but her perception of the world was filtered through that of someone who knew nothing about how things actually worked and how everyday people lived. She had frequently answered questions with statements about what she would do after becoming the Queen's accolade, as though this title would allow her to solve any problem facing the realm or any of its provinces. Athandra had been told about this goal the princess had for herself. Corvin had warned her of Tawara's ambitions to become accolade, as well as the danger in which such a pursuit had already placed her and House Umari. The princess will try to recruit you, Corvin had told her. She will try to win you over to her cause. She is very headstrong in that way, but she does not see. The pursuit itself has already placed a target on her back. The eastern provinces will not sit idly by while their power is supplanted. Not only that, the pathway to the title is fraught with peril. She will make as many enemies as she does admirers, and should she aim off the mark, she will be imprisoned or executed, and likely bring about the ruin of this house in the process. You must dissuade her, Athandra. You must gain her trust, and use your influence to steer her away from such treacherous waters. Athandra had considered Corvin's request. It was not without merit. She knew of Lady Farandane's death and the attempt on Tawara's life. It could not be coincidence that both had designs to obtain the title. The successor to the throne was the first princess of the realm, she with the most seniority. However, the queen could appoint an accolade from among the crowned princesses, making her the new successor. To be raised to this elevated position, a princess must earn the confidence of the queen, the trust of the high court, the love of the people, and show her competency in all things, thus proving she should be the next queen. The pursuit of the title was sure to cause strife with the potential to lead the realm into civil war. It was a title scarcely sought after, and even more scarcely awarded. There had not been an accolade in Kuvia for nearly 1,000 years. The current queen had been the monarch for just over a century, and may live for another century. If Tawara were to be appointed accolade, she would likely become the youngest queen in the history of the realm. Athandra knew of the accolades of the past. They were not lackeys. They had to be willing to go against the grain, but also be competent enough to back it up, thus earning their positions. There had been some who aspired to be accolades, who had lost their crowns, been exiled, or occasionally even beheaded for how severely they had misjudged their abilities. But in a brief time, Athandra had seen the potential in Tawara. She had the makings of greatness, if only she could be taught to get out of her own way. She herself was not averse to facing danger, nor was she in the habit of turning away from challenges. She had spent most of her life educating herself, and using that education to tutor those who considered her beneath them. She had traveled most of Adamar, ventured into eastern Brundia, traveled parts of Perome, and spent a good deal of time with upper houses of Kuvia. She would not waste this opportunity. If Tawara wanted to become the queen's accolade, the best thing Athandra could do was make sure she succeeded and ride along with Tawara in her rise in power. If Tawara could learn to trust her, she would keep her as a handmaid after her coronation. If Athandra could truly help Tawara accomplish her goals, perhaps she could go beyond a handmaid and be appointed an official counselor. It would be a new precedent, having a wood elf as a political advisor, but Tawara was trying to do something rarely done. So she would have to break precedent to accomplish her goal. Why not do the same with Athandra? She was grateful to Corvin for bringing her into the house, but as of the moment she took on the role of handmaid, her destiny was inevitably tied to that of Tawara's. If she saw things through, she would be Tawara's personal advisor when the accolade became queen. It was late in the evening as Athandra sat in her room pondering over the progress she had made with Tawara. She wouldn't exactly call what they had friendship, but at least the hostility had dissipated, and their interactions were much more amiable compared to 2 weeks prior. Tawara still brought up The Trekkan youths on occasion, having not had the opportunity to resolve the matter with Corvin, was clearly still weighing on her. Athandra had caught Tawara petting Cloud, or one of the other horses that had belonged to the youths, in a rather mournful manner when she thought Athandra wasn't looking. Just the previous night, she had entered Tawara's antechamber to check on her before going to her own rooms. Tawara left the door open to her bedroom, and Athandra saw her lying on the bed, weeping. She slipped out of the antechamber and closed the door quietly so as not to disturb Tawara. She hoped the traumatic nature of the events with the Trekkan, coupled with her feelings of loneliness and frustration in her daily life, would not stay with Tawara permanently. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion in the hallway outside her rooms. She stood, grabbed a robe from the end of her bed, and rushed to the door. Peering into the hallway, she saw a group of guardsmen outside Tawara's rooms with their weapons drawn. They made a semicircle around the open door, and Athandra heard Tessera and Captain Ethrin's raised voices coming from within. She left the doorway and moved quickly toward the group of soldiers. "What is happening?" she queried as she approached. "Is something wrong with Whoa!" She was cut off mid-question and came to a jerking halt as the tip of a sword was brought up to her chest. She barely stopped in time. The sword tip was pressed hard between her breasts as she took a stumbling step backward. "Stay where you are," commanded the soldier, who had nearly run her through. She was shocked into silence, mouth agape, as she stood staring at the soldier, pointing his sword at her. Her shock was broken by Captain Ethrin walking out of Tawara's antechamber. "Propriety is the last thing I'm worried about at a time like this, Tessera. My men will do what is necessary. Propriety be damned." He looked over his shoulder as he exited the room, and turned to see the guardsman standing in the hallway. One man's sword still pointed at Athandra, as she stood gripping her robe tightly in both hands at her chest, where the sword point hovered in front of her. "Bloody hell!" Ethrin exclaimed as he slapped down the soldier's arm, holding the sword. "I said to stand guard against any threats, not against young women in their night clothes." He pushed past the soldiers. Are you all right, Athandra?" he asked, a hint of exasperation in his voice. "Yes, Captain. Is Tawara all right? Did something happen?" She felt flustered and fought frustration as she spoke. "Tawara is fine, but Master Duchesne is dead. I fear Tawara has taken another emotional blow this night. I hope she will let you offer her comfort. I'm only glad she is safe, and that the assassin was caught." "Assassin?" Athandra exclaimed. "Is Tawara in danger?" "I believe the threat has passed, but the guards will remain in Tawara's rooms for now. On Tawara's rooms for now." He gave them a sidelong glance, and his voice rose again slightly. "And guard against actual threats?" He turned back to Athandra, and his voice returned to a calmer level. "Go ahead, Athandra. See to the princess. I have work yet to do tonight, and need to be about it." "Thank you, Captain," Athandra replied, bowing her head slightly. She turned and walked quickly past the guards and into the antechamber. As she crossed the room, she was met at the bed-chamber door by Tessera, who stopped abruptly in front of Athandra. She, too, was in her night-clothes, wrapped in a silk robe of blue and green. Even dressed as she was, she held an air of superiority and grace. "Athandra, good, you are here. I was on my way to retrieve you. Tawara is disheveled and in quite a mood, although I can hardly blame her. I would be quite put out to have a company of soldiers burst into my bedchamber while I was... well, you know how Tawara sleeps. I assume Captain Ethrin told you about Master Duchesne?" It took Athandra a moment to catch up. Tessera seemed quite shaken herself. Athandra had not heard her go on so before. Despite her haughty air, her eyes had a wild cast to them, like a horse that had been spooked and had not yet calmed. "Well, girl," Tessera snapped, "did he inform you or not?" "Oh, yes, Mistress Tessera. Captain Ethrin told me of Master Duchesne and the assassin that was captured. He didn't tell me how any of this happened or what else is going on. And there is nothing more you need to know tonight. The captain and his men will do their duty and keep watch through the night. All you need to be concerned with is caring for Tawara. You will be informed of anything you need to know when you need to know it. There is no need for you to worry Tawara with speculation about which she can do nothing. Do you understand?" Athandra nodded. "I understand, mistress. I will care for the princess." She understood, and Tessera was right. She would learn the events of the evening in good time, as she could do nothing about any of them anyway. Right now, Tawara needed her, and she would do whatever she could to offer comfort. "Good girl," Tessera replied. She was surprised when Tessera laid a hand gently on Athandra's shoulder, and she could see moisture in Tessera's eyes. "Stay with her tonight, if she'll let you," she said softly. The hand on her shoulder squeezed gently. Then Tessera was away, walking regally out the antechamber door, drawing it close behind her. Athandra approached the bedchamber door slowly. All the lamps in the room were lit, and Tawara sat at her writing desk. Her robe was on her shoulders, but hung open, draping down to the floor on either side of the chair. She sat staring at her hands, which were folded gently in her lap. Athandra crossed the room, pausing at the end of the bed. "My lady?" she asked gently. "Hmm?" Tawara replied. Her chin tilted up slightly, but her eyes did not leave her hands. After a moment she turned her head and looked up at Athandra. "Oh, Athandra," she said somewhat dreamily. Her eyes seemed to be looking through Athandra rather than at her. "Did they tell you?" she continued in that same dreamy voice. "Master Duchesne is dead. An assassin came to kill me, and Duchesne stopped him, but not before the assassin could kill him. He was unarmed, on his way back from the steam house. He went there nearly every night, you know. He said it kept him young." She smiled slightly, apparently lost in memory. "My lady," Athandra said again, stepping forward, "let me help you to bed." When Tawara made no move, Athandra reached down and took her by the hands, pulling gently. Tawara gave no resistance, letting herself be pulled to her feet. Athandra moved Tawara's robe and laid it on the chair. She took Tawara's hands again and led her gently to the bed. Drawing back the covers, she slowly coaxed the younger woman until she was prone, her head on the pillow, staring up at the ceiling. Athandra left her side and made her way around the room, extinguishing the lamps. The last lamp was at Tawara's bedside. As Athandra reached for the lamp, Tawara's hand shot out, seizing her wrist. Athandra gave a little squeak and looked down at Tawara. Her eyes were wide and her gaze intense. She stared at Athandra for a moment, and her chin began to quiver. She said quietly, her voice trembling with a single syllable. "He's dead, Athandra. It was supposed to be me. They were coming for me, and they killed him. Oh, Athandra!" Her voice began to rise in pitch. "He was my friend, and they killed him. My friends are dead, and Duchesne is dead. Oh, gods, Athandra, they're all dead, and it's all because of me." She turned her head, burying her face in the pillow. "It's all because of me." Athandra pushed into the bed beside Tawara and wrapped her arms around the weeping woman. Tawara turned her face to bury it in Athandra's shoulder, wrapping her arms around her middle. She clung to Athandra as if for dear life and wept profusely. Athandra didn't know how long Tawara held on to her. Eventually her sobs gave way to soft whimpers. Her arms relaxed, and she fell into a fitful sleep. Athandra stayed with her that night, holding her close. Occasionally she would jerk and cry out slightly, and Athandra would stroke her golden hair and shush her soothingly. Sometime in the night, as she held the young princess, an intrusive thought crept into her mind, like dark clouds blotting out an already melancholy moon, bringing with them a tempest of shame and guilt. This whole ordeal may prove advantageous to her personal desires and goals. By caring for Tawara, she would, more likely than not, be endearing herself to the princess. As Tawara rose to power, she herself could be propelled upward, and in time possibly become advisor to a crown princess of the realm. It was at once an unwelcome thought, and Athandra tried to banish it away, yet the best she could do was push it to the back of her mind. More than once the clouds resurfaced, bringing with them a storm of emotion. Each time she pushed them away, burying them with other thoughts, yet it never quite left her mind. As she lay there in the dark, she did not know what was more disturbing to her, the events of the night or the thoughts of personal gain that may come from those events. In the early hours of pre-dawn, Tawara's fits seemed to subside, and real sleep overtook her. Athandra let herself drift off, Tawara still wrapped gently in her arms. Dun dun dun. Okay.
All right.
That is chapter 18. Death, destruction, carnage.
Yes, but also love and friendship and
Yeah.
bonding.
Yeah. But as we roll forward, you're probably, maybe picking up on that people die in our book.
Yes, they do.
And it's like, we figured we want our book to feel real. We want this story. It's a fantasy story, but we want it to feel real and for you to connect. And tragedy happens in reality, and in the world that they live in, tragedy can strike. They live in a world where assassins are a regular thing, and wars happen and conflict happens, and there's people that are enslaved and people that are subjugated and all these things. So if you live in a world like that, there's going to be people that you know that are going to die. And sometimes we have to kill them. So we hope you like that chapter. And we're going to have a guest come and join us in just a minute. So we have Liz Verity joining us today.
Welcome, Liz.
Hello. It's good to be
Hey.
back.
Yeah. Table. We just had a discussion where Jared chastised me, telling me, stop touching the table and shaking everything.
And then you did it.
And then I
Right
did
off
it
the bat.
right off the bat.
Now you got it out of your system.
I got it out of my system. Hopefully, gosh dang it! See, I'm not going to be able to help myself. If everything shakes, it's not an earthquake, Liz. It's okay.
It's okay.
Don't dive under the table
Or
It's-
behind the curtain.
or behind the curtain. It's just me moving stuff.
Good to know.
Oh, okay, cross my arms, lock them in place. So, how have you been?
Pretty good.
That's good.
How about you?
Not too shabby.
Yeah. Getting that editing done for the second book.
Oh gosh,
It's going.
it's going.
Going.
We are not going to make our end of September goal that we had.
No.
I understand that. I don't think I've ever made one of my goal deadlines. So I think that's just part of being an author.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. I mean, we had high hopes. But there's life, full-time jobs, kids wrecking cars, which we talked a little bit about.
Yes. That puts a dent in the day.
Yes. So it happens. So your life, things going well?
Yeah.
How is speaking of goals and writing, how are things coming?
So I've been kind of at a drawback. So last time I was on, we talked about books and big books and how we like them and all this kind of
Yes.
stuff. But traditional publishers are saying, don't do big ones. And
Which is a lie. It's
yeah,
a lie, traditional publishers. You're lying.
yeah, there's lots of people that like the bigger books. But I have come to a realization that they do have a point, especially for debut authors.
Yeah.
Because if you want to write, one of those honking 800-page books, it's going to be a $50 book.
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't going to take that initiative and be like, oh, I've never heard of this person before. I'll spend $50 on them.
Yeah.
So I get, at least at the very beginning, it's good to write smaller books so people take a chance on you with a lesser cost.
Yeah.
So in the light of that, I've going through my book and I'm trying to cut it way, way back. So that's been a challenge and a heartbreak.
So let me ask you a question there then. And this is something I've thought about because we released our book, and we broke it into parts to try to make it smaller, but that means like book one doesn't end.
Yeah.
It's like chapter one. So I've thought about that, and I've thought about, racked my brain and pondered on, okay, what are we doing the right thing? I'm like, well, it's kind of too late. We've already got it out there. We
Yeah.
got to keep going.
Yeah.
And I thought about, in hindsight, if I were to approach it differently, I wouldn't want to cut our book down. I wouldn't want to chop it because of the story that we're trying to tell in
Mhm.
general. But I had the thought, what if I wrote if I was going to do something shorter and get some things out there that are in like the, 90,000 word range,
Mhm.
or, 50 to 90,000 word range, those shorter books. What if I just wrote a completely different story? Have you thought
Yes.
about that? Instead of saying, this thing that I love, I'm going to chop its arms and legs off
Yeah.
and put a stump out there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've thought of the same thing. The problem with me is I'm very tunnel visioned. So like when I get on something, like I'm on it until it's done. Like I
Yeah.
want to complete it. So it'll be hard for me to break off and go to another project, but I think I'm going to have to do that anyways. But I'm still looking at my book and trying to figure out where the extraneous stuff is, because we do, as authors, we get attached to things, and
We
we're
don't
just
put
like,
extra stuff in
I
our
love
books.
this
Nothing.
scene. Yeah, and it's like, I don't care. It doesn't have anything to do with plot. Like it's character development,
Yeah.
But so I'm going through as kind of like a teaching thing for myself and being like, okay, like you have to get rid of anything that doesn't push the plot forward,
Yeah.
which has been really hard for me. I've also tried to take out some subplots and things like that. So not a fun experience, but I think it's a good learning lesson.
Yeah.
So it still isn't going to be down to that, 100K word count that everybody wants. It's probably going to be closer to the 150. But it probably isn't going to be my first release either because I can't figure out how to cut it down that far without, like you said, throwing out a stump
Yeah.
and hoping people like it. So it'll probably have to be another book. But I'm still like going through that process and being like, okay, this is how you're going to cut down. This is how you can streamline. Because I think that's going to help me in the future being able to write
Yeah.
and be like, okay, like I love this scene. This is great. And then at the end of it, I can look back and be like, did that push the plot forward? Like, no. All right, get rid of it and try again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it'll help the writing process going forward.
Well, like the short story intro, actually, the beach one I didn't get to submit it.
Oh yeah, the one that you read on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like that was a lot longer than 500 words.
Yes, 500 words is so hard for
That's
most
really
people.
tight.
Like if you don't know, that's like half a page to a page, depending on what type of
Yeah.
formatting you do. It's not very long.
Yeah, I think like a standard Word document will have like 380 words on a single page, depending on how your spacing is.
Mhm.
So 500 words with standard spacing and margins and everything is like one page and a paragraph.
Yeah, like a couple lines.
Maybe a paragraph and a half. And like that's it. So I had to not be wordy
Yes, yeah, and
at
that's so
all
hard.
to try to cut that down. And in doing that, I was like, well, I figured out I can actually write like this. Like I could be okay writing a story like this.
Mhm.
It doesn't fit what we're doing at
No.
all.
Not quite.
Yeah,
And
like
our chapters are 5,000 to 7,000 words.
yeah. And there will be some people that don't like that. I'm like, but I'm like, we're already
okay.
there. We're already doing it. It's
Yeah.
okay. But for other stories, like if I end up continuing the beach story,
Mhm.
or the one that I submitted previously with the like the
End of the
the
world.
tear
Yeah.
in the sky,
Mhm.
that same thing. The intention of that is not to be really descriptive. It's to just quickly paint a picture and be more fast paced.
Yeah, like a thriller type pacing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So doing both of those helped me realize like I can write like this. But then that made me think, well, should I be doing these? Because they would be a lot shorter. And then my name would get out there and then I'd get a following. Then I could write the big stuff.
Mhm.
But it's too late. We're already writing the big stuff.
Well, you could throw out some of those shorter ones in between.
Maybe if I get a time turner,
Yes. Yeah, you just
then
gotta
I
create
could
more
do
time.
that. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Someday. But no, are you looking at then like are you going to keep on in the direction of parsing what you have down, or do you think you'll make a shift and shift your focus to something else for the time being?
Yeah, so I am working on parsing it down um, as much as I possibly can, just to see what comes out. And if I
Yeah.
absolutely hate it, then I will keep the giant version I have.
Yeah.
But I am working on parsing it down just to see how far I can push myself. But at the same time, I have a new book idea rattling in my head for, okay, like this can be a shorter one. So I don't have a problem putting words to a page. When I gave my book out to my beta readers, I let them have it for a month. And in that month, I wrote a 60K. I called it a novella.
Yeah.
Not actually a novella length. So I figured it's like, okay, if I can do that in a month,
Yeah.
and by the time I go back through that and I flesh it out and I edit it and all that kind of stuff, it always grows in word count. My editing never goes down; it always goes
Yeah.
up. So it's like by the time I get done with that, it'll be like a normal size book. So I was like, okay, well, if I just throw out a book that's that 60K, and then build it from there, and I
Yeah.
could have a regular-ish book for
Yeah.
people who want it. And then I can use that to kind of get some followers before I get put out the big ones
Yeah.
with people that I know will spend the money to get them. So
Yeah, I was gonna say when you said I don't have a problem putting words to page. I'm like, no, we typically have problems taking the words back off the
yes,
page.
yes, exactly. Yeah, there's two types of writers. The ones that, always write short and they have to figure out how to expand it, and the ones that write too long and have to figure out how to cut it. And I don't understand the other side. I'm like, how can you not have enough words? Like that just blows my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah, I at all. I don't get it at all.
I do.
You get it?
Yeah. Because I will write and then I will go back through and expand on what I've written. Typically is more of my pacing when I'm writing on my own. Now, when we write together, that's totally different.
Because you're
Yeah.
trying to reel him in constantly.
Well, that's like we've gone through and done like bullet points.
Mhm.
And well, we did that last night. We were
Yeah.
working on a new chapter last night of like this one has to be revised. And we're like, okay, well, what has to happen in this chapter to get us to the next piece? So we talked through it and I'm like, okay, let's bullet point this out. And we put it all out. And I'm like, it's like almost 2 full pages of just one sentence bullet points. And then I'm like, this is just the idea. Each one of these bullet points is going to be like a paragraph or 2
Yeah.
to like, so it's going to be like 18 pages of this one chapter. But I'm like, but each one of these is we have to go from A to B to C to D to E all the way up through like, if you're in Excel, it would be like AXY.
Yep.
And just to give perspective, the chapter that we're redoing was originally like a 4-page chapter, 4 or 5-page chapter.
Yeah.
But so much has changed from the first book
Hmm.
and how we've incorporated into the earlier parts of this new book that all that has to happen pretty much in this chapter to get to the next chapter. And so it's going to expand what was a very short kind of fun little chapter into a much longer and more more involved chapter.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that because in my book where I'm going through and cutting out chapters, I'm like, okay, I don't need that, I don't need that, I don't need that. And I end up with like chapter 1 and say chapter 7.
Mm-hmm.
I then have to find a bridge to be like, okay, how do I get from this one to that one? And it always ends up longer than I think it needs to be to bridge it. And I'm like, okay, it's still shorter than the 6 chapters I originally had in between. But like, yeah, when you're trying to bridge something, it
See, we
takes
don't,
a little while.
we don't,
You don't delete chapters.
no, we totally delete
Oh,
chapters.
okay.
The problem is it's like a hydra.
It comes back.
We're like, okay, we don't need this chapter and we don't need this one. We need to move this one up here. But in order to make that flow, we just cut out 3 and now we're going to add in and now it's 5 new. We're like, so we
Yeah.
took 3 out and we got 5
Put
new
5
ones.
more in.
Yeah. Like,
I
good
get
go.
it. I get it.
Yeah. It's unending. It happens
Yes.
constantly.
Have
So
you figured out that there's like a specific type of detail that seems to do that to you? Like for me, whenever I'm like going through a chapter and stuff, it's usually when I figure out like something in their internal journey is off. And I'm like, this is a great moment for them to learn a lesson. And then my word count will just expand because of that. Is there something that you guys have that just kind of like, you're like, okay, when it comes to this kind of thing, like I'm just going to write way more words than I need?
Well, in this particular instance, it's a lot of external influence that is coming in for her to be able to move on with her internal story.
Mhm.
So we're having to bring added external information and influence, and then she has to process that for her own internal.
Yeah.
yeah,
Makes sense.
I think for us, a lot of it is we already know the direction our character needs to go, and we know the growth our character needs to go through, and we have like all the points of here's what our character is going to experience to get Tawara. Here's what Tawara needs to go through to get her to this end thing. But then we have our overarching story of we have these political maneuvers that are happening and we have these magical things that are coming in,
Yeah.
and then we're like, well, in order for these pieces to come together and for Tawara to experience this arc, we have to have some other connecting event that bring these things together.
So it's the foreshadowing, the subplots that kind
Yeah.
of get you guys.
And it drives being able to connect those pieces together and make them, we're like, okay, we've already built this whole storyline,
Mhm.
and we have to continue that, but we have to bring this other piece in and they have to merge. And the only way to do that is to start pointing things in that direction, and that means more layers to the cake.
Yes, yes,
So,
definitely. That does.
so that's kind of the driver behind our expanding things.
Yeah. Yeah, I find subplots get me quite often too, because I'll be like, oh, but I opened up that one section in that chapter, and it's gonna, have a linchpin in the plan at the end. So now I have to weave it through all these others, and every time you add a sentence about it, your word count goes up. So
Yeah.
And then you have geniuses like this one over here
yeah.
that decide to add a character.
Oh,
Well, I mean, we
a
have
whole new character is like adding like another quarter of the book.
yeah.
This is just a little character. But now, like into book 3, there's a whole large section of the beginning of book 3 that I wrote.
Hmm.
And now I have to weave this character into it.
Oh no.
Well, we decided, we were like, we have 2 characters that are going to show up all the way in. I mean, they show up early, but they are the resolution characters for book 14, like
Oh
the
wow.
end.
Okay. Yeah.
And we were like looking forward, and we're like, there has to be another connection. And then we're like, wait a minute, we've already brought a couple characters in book 1, and coming into book 2, we're like, we have to introduce that third pivotal person now
Mm-hmm.
in order to make it work.
Yep.
But that means the stuff we already have written all has to change to incorporate the new character that we just added in book 2
Yep.
that is going to be pivotal for how the entire story ends in book 14.
Wow.
And
So
it's amazing how that snowballs. I don't think I'll give too much away by saying it's a pet. Is that too much? I don't know.
no,
Well, you already said it,
well,
so.
no, because there are a lot of pets.
There are a lot
We
of
do have
pets.
multiple pets
Oh, good. I
in
love
our
pets.
story.
Do they
so-
die?
Well, that would be giving too much away.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop reading your books if you kill them, so you better not kill them.
We kill a lot of people.
Okay, people's fine. Just don't kill the animals.
And it started as just a cute little thing.
Yeah.
And then
It's-
we're like, then the aha moment goes, wait, this is what we needed.
Well, how many people in the Wheel of Time, the
Mhm.
series,
Yeah.
that think Bella is the creator? They're like, we're pretty sure Bella is actually the creator, just there in horse form. And then Sam had Bill, the horse. Like, people grab on to
Yep.
Bill, the pony. He was a horse that Sam took along with him. And people are like, when is Bill going to come back? What do you know?
Yeah. We like our animals.
So, yeah, they're part of the thing.
Hmm. Part of the world.
Yeah. Well, Liz, we kind of danced around a whole bunch of other stuff,
No, it's great.
but you had some stuff you wanted. I'm going to try not to touch the table or kick it or anything. You had some stuff you wanted to talk to us about today.
Yeah, I thought it would be fun to discuss character portrayal of emotions.
Okay.
Not necessarily internal emotions. So you have your point of view character, your POV character that you are kind of seeing the scene through. We're not talking about that because that's interiority. It's like 5 episodes of its own.
Yeah.
It's real intense. So this is just like outwardly showing it so that your character is picking up emotions from other people and things like that.
So, in terms of writing emotion for a character, just for the reader to pick up on, is that?
Yeah, how your point of view character is picking up emotions. So if you're sitting over there with your hands like this,
So-
you're either cold or you're mad kind of thing.
So
usually.
so let's set the stage here. We're reading a story and it's from Liz Verity's perspective.
Yes.
and Liz Verity sees me do this.
Yeah, cross your arms over your chest.
Yeah, cross my
Then
arms
I'm
and
like, all
drop
right,
my shoulders
maybe he's upset,
and
like,
squint my
okay,
eyes.
what's going on? Yeah. So it's things like that you're gonna kind of put in your book, because you can't say it's head hopping for me as an author to be like, Liz is sitting in her chair and she looks over at Chris and he's mad.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, how do I know he's mad? So just kind of ways of showing it.
Okay.
And the two main ways is obviously body language, but then also the words you choose, the tone you set, that kind of thing will also give it away.
Okay. So an example of that, like something that I see frequently, it's all over in the Wheel of Time. It's in multiple other books.
Yeah.
And you'll probably be like, yep, as soon as I say it. And it is, their smile never reached their eyes.
Yes. Yes. That one happens often.
All the time, in like all kinds of stories, books all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on that one in particular?
So that one relies a lot on cliche.
Yeah.
So it's overused. So a lot of people aren't going to probably respond to it as you would want to.
Yeah.
So I suggest usually looking for other cues that you can find. It's kind of hard to pick up on these without, I guess, going out and actually studying people.
Mhm.
So that's how I suggest you figure it out. But there's all kinds of different signals, like how do you know someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes?
Yeah.
And it's usually because the skin around your eyes, it isn't crinkling. Because when
Yeah.
you smile genuinely, you have this kind of squint to your eyes as well. And that makes crinkles in your eyes. And that's usually what they mean whenever they say, it didn't reach their eyes. You can move your lips without affecting the rest of your face if it isn't genuine.
Yeah.
So it's coming up with those little things there of like, okay, what does this saying actually mean? And then how can I show that
Yeah.
in a different way?
Another one that I've heard, kind of along the same lines that I've read in a lot of stories, is they bared their teeth.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, I know what that means when a dog does that.
Yes. Yeah, snarl.
Yeah. But I'm like, I've read that many times, and I've been like, well, when have I ever actually seen a person just bare their teeth at someone?
Other
Yeah.
than some idiot on TikTok.
Yeah.
Yes, for purposes of video, people will do it.
Well, I'm trying to think of a movie even.
Hmm.
Like when is the best I can think of is like the cover of Wolverine when Hugh Jackman, he's got his,
Yes.
and he's like, and I'm like, he's obviously baring his teeth. But I can't think of any time when I've ever actually seen a human that isn't on TV posing for the cover of like a DVD cover
Uh-huh.
or a movie poster. When have I ever seen anybody just bare their teeth?
Yeah, exactly. And you think of it like that's kind of fun to look at things in books that people like don't think twice about.
Yeah.
And then in reality, if someone did it, they would be like laughed at
Yeah.
probably. I mean, like it's like, okay, what are you doing?
Well, and when they say that, like I try to pick up on other clues in the writing to be like, well, what do they mean by that?
Hmm.
Is it a different way of writing? They smiled, but the smile didn't reach their eyes
Hmm.
and they're fake smiling.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be like they're mad, they're kind of like growling, snarling. It could be, frustration. Like there's so many things.
Yeah. But again, I'm trying to think when I've ever, even if I've been frustrated, where I'm like,
I've actually seen you do that.
bare my teeth.
But
I mean, I will do this. I'll be like, oh, gosh, dang it. You
Yeah.
know, but I'm like, even angry. Someone
Yeah.
was like, this cucumber is rotten at the farmer's market. Growing a grow. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard, like, because we're so used to writing those cliches that we don't think about it often. Like, we kind of know what it means, but when you stop and think about it, you're like, that doesn't really make sense.
Well, that's where, like, I know if I write something like that, I know what I'm trying to say as a writer. But when I read those things, I don't always know what the author who wrote that
Hmm.
is trying to tell me.
Yeah.
Because frequently they'll write that without enough other clues where I'm like, well, wait a minute, are they like Emperor's New Groove?
Yes.
Yzma is talking to the Emperor, and uh, the Emperor Cusco has turned into a llama, and he's sitting at the table, and Kronk is trying to figure out what to do, and Yzma's smiling, and she has her broccoli, and she's like, hit him in the head,
Yep.
you know, and you can totally, like, they pulled it off perfectly, but it's in video. You can see it. She's trying to, her lips are smiling, but her eyes are like panicking, and she's got the broccoli, and she's hitting the other broccoli. It's like, hit him in the head, with the, you know, and then Kronk's like, oh, boom, and knocks him out.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, I totally get what Yzma was doing. She's got to try to pretend like she's smiling for Cusco, but you can see the panic in her eyes as she's trying to communicate. Knock him out.
Yes.
How did you turn him into a llama, you idiot? You know? But I'm like, writing that scene, there are authors who will write that scene into a story, and they would describe Yzma smiling and talking or whatever. And frequently I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to say.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why it's important to always pair it with other things and not just facial expressions.
Yeah.
I mean, you can use the whole body, the feet, the hands, arms, the torso, the posture. Like there's so many other things that you can draw from that you don't have to just be like, you know, she smiled with wide eyes or whatever,
Yeah.
and then
So,
move on.
so do you have any examples of some, whether it's in writing or, well, we're talking about writing, but it can be anything.
Anything,
Any
yeah.
examples you can think of like, here's something that someone did really well, or anything that you've written where you've been like, I feel like I did this really well.
I don't know. Putting me on the spot here.
Or even off the top of your head, what are some things you would like, maybe some specific things you might describe, or ways someone writing might describe body language or positions, fidgeting, all these different things to portray emotion that don't fit cliche and help from the character's perspective pick up on the emotion being projected by whoever else is in the scene.
Mm-hmm. So we could go with primary emotions. There's a lot of cliches around them, like anger, happiness, sadness. Like everybody goes to the same go-tos. If you're angry, you clench your fist. You know, your
Yeah.
face is red. You know, if you're happy, you're smiling or whatever.
And you clap your hands.
Yeah, exactly. So like I always try to look, like I said, at the rest of the body, because a lot of people miss that. Like if you're happy, like you just talk about a walk. Like if they're gonna walk towards you, you know, they could be there's a spring in their step, you know, they're kind of bouncing, or they're dragging their feet, they're sluggish, they're stomping their feet. Like there's several different ways a person can walk that can give you what the emotion is right away.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to go into how they looked in their face and all that kind of stuff. So that's generally what I try to do. I mean, I pair it with the face as well because we're people. Whenever we talk to someone or we're interacting with someone, we're going to be mostly looking at their face. So there's still going to be that cue that your character is going to pick up on.
Yeah.
But you can use the rest of it to kind of, like you said, show for sure what the emotion is and not just hope that the reader knows what that one signal means.
Yeah. What about using simile or metaphor in character emotional descriptions?
Yeah.
Any perspective on that?
Yeah, so you can definitely do that. There was one time where there was two characters and there was a kind of a rainstorm, thunderstorm going on outside. You can use how they interpret that to show emotion as well. So instead of saying like, you know, they sat there in a ball, they were sad, you know, it was raining outside. You know, you can talk about how the rain is, you know, crying for them and, you know, the sky is flashing lights and all the bad memories come back with it or something like that. Like you
Yeah.
can use it to show as a negative thing. Or you can have another person that's sitting there going, okay, like this, it's raining outside, washing the world anew, everything's bright, and clean now, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So it's yeah, how your character views things can definitely give you their emotions. But you can't use that as much for describing other people's emotions. Simply because you have to be in their perspective to get them, unless they're going to say in dialogue, like, it's raining and
Yeah.
I feel like they're crying for me, then obviously they can do that. But
Well, I was thinking in terms of like you describe the way someone looks. They appear like they're. Um, uh, I'm trying to think of it. Like their face slowly, slowly fell. Like I'm trying to think of a good example of something falling slowly.
like a mudslide.
Yeah, I was thinking of mudslide. And I'm like, oh, that usually happens pretty fast, and
Yeah.
but it is devastating. So if you're describing,
Yeah.
someone feeling devastated, like I'm not sure how if that metaphor works exactly.
Yeah, I read one author one time talk about how a character sat down on the couch like a deflated cushion. So something like
Yeah.
that, where you're kind of showing like, okay, obviously something's down. You can't really tell what. I mean, it could be that they're frustrated, that they're exhausted, that they're tired, they're sad, whatever. But
Well, but
gives
I
a
like
hint.
so exactly what you said. That's a good, and I've seen it used a lot. But that description of deflated,
Mhm.
I like that, and granted, it is used a lot, but that's a good one in my opinion.
Yeah.
Of like when someone, different scenarios where one might be, they threw the ball down the bowling alley, or down the lane, and they watched, with their eyes were alight, and they were on their tiptoes, and then they deflated and their shoulders drooped as the ball spun and then went into the gutter.
Hmm.
They were so close to winning
Yeah.
the championship bowling, but it just deflated.
Yeah.
You just see them, their body just physically, like you just let all the air out of them.
Hmm.
And there's different ways of using that in like, oh, they were excited about something, or they're hoping to save somebody and then the person just dies in front of them, and then just that devastation, just they're deflated as whatever they were intending to do.
Yeah. Yeah, using the setting is a great way of showing character emotions because it grounds your reader in the here and now of what's going on and that kind of stuff. But it also can tell you about that character too. So, if you go into a room and it's all in blacks and whites, someone could think, that's really depressing. Another person could think, oh, this is really clean and safe
Yeah.
environment kind of thing. So, but anytime you can work that in, like he stared at her as sharp as, I don't know, the swords on the wall or something like that, where
Yeah.
you're pulling in the setting, but you're also giving the emotion without saying, he's mad.
So what might be some things that someone could use so just different descriptors that you can think of, like some specific descriptors of interpreting body language, even if it's like maybe the author, or maybe not the author, maybe the character is misinterpreting, but it's okay.
Mhm.
It's through the eyes of the character. They're viewing somebody else. What are some things that visual cues they might pick up on?
So for me, like, I think one of the big ones that I see a lot of books miss is like posture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily like, are they sitting straight? Are they slumped? It could be which way are their shoulders squared? Because there's a thing in body language studies where people are squared off to usually whatever's the biggest threat, or whatever they're most interested in. It's whatever they want to give their most focus to. So just something as simple as that, like, talking, if you have two guys talking, but the one guy's, squared off to this lady over on the other side of the room or something, like he'd rather be over there, but he's over here talking. So those kind of things, how they lean, do they lean, if you're sitting side by side, if you're leaning into each other, you're maybe friends, each other. If you're away, maybe they're strangers.
Yeah.
So those are little things from kind of like a farther distance that you can use for your characters that makes it more unique.
Yeah. So when you were talking about that, it made me think of, um, and funnily enough, we brought this up earlier, the movie Tombstone.
Yes.
So in that movie, so Kurt Russell, who's Wyatt Earp, is standing out in the street, and the wind is blowing, the
Hmm.
dust through the air, and I don't remember the actor guy and the lady get off the stage, and then they're looking and they see why they have no idea who he is. It's just to them, it's just a guy,
Yeah.
but it's like the embodiment of the man from the West. And he's like, notice the lean, and and
Yes.
while he's not standing up straight, his shoulders aren't squared, but he's slightly leaned to the side, like this casual, like semi-casual lean,
Yeah.
but like a threatening, like almost on the verge of being able to spring at any moment into action.
Yes.
And then he mentions, like, notice like his eyes are squinted against the sun, like, and or like eagle eyes, and probably observing and picking up everything around him. And I'm like, that description is like, that's a good go-to, in my opinion.
Yes.
Go watch Tombstone, find the scene. Like, that is how you can write into a character this. His entire persona emits this. He appears casual, but a second glance tells you he's on guard, red, and at a moment's, at the drop of a hat, could become deadly instantly.
Yep. Exactly. And you didn't have to, describe that his hand was almost, by his
Yeah,
gun or anything like that. It's just all in how he held himself.
yeah. Everything, I've heard some descriptions of, like, they look relaxed, but you look closer and like their muscles are, just slightly coiled.
Yeah.
The knees slightly bent, ready to, they don't have their legs locked. They're not totally at ease. Their feet aren't crossed and they're kicked up on the chair. Everything is under slight tension, like a cat right before it springs up onto the counter where it's not supposed to be.
Yes,
You know?
exactly. Yeah. And that was a good example of a metaphor to use.
Hey, there you go.
But yeah, exactly.
Okay. Um,
So, not to jump over here, but we talking a lot about body language and stuff,
Yeah.
but there's the other side of it, and that's the wording
okay.
that you can use as well. And it's not just
Wording is in vocabulary or dialogue.
yeah,
Or
either. So it depends on how you write. If you're writing with a close POV, so close third or first person, where the narration is basically the character telling you the story,
yeah.
it's from their perspective, you can just drop it in the narration. If it's omniscient or it's somebody else, like not your POV character, then you can put it in dialogue.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the way. I mean, you can describe tone, obviously. Did they deadpan it? Did
Yeah.
they scream it? Those kind of things will give cues. But just also how you word it and how you put in those biased words. That immediately it's like a mood indicator.
So what would be an example of that, of like a mood
Um,
indicator that's a biased word?
okay, so a neutral statement would be like, he didn't use his blinker. Yeah, like, you don't know how I'm feeling. It's just a statement.
Yeah.
If I say the idiot didn't use his blinker,
Yeah.
okay, well, I may be frustrated with them. But if I say, oh, the idiot didn't even use his stupid blinker, even though, there was 5 lanes of traffic.
Yeah.
Even if I had kept my voice totally calm, I'm saying idiot and stupid and,
Yeah.
and pointing out obvious facts of why he should have used his blinker. So people know I'm upset about it.
Okay. And when you're talking about this, you're talking about, again, looking through the POV character's eyes, the other person saying
Yeah,
that.
the other person saying that to us, and we can immediately be like, oh, like if they're having a phone conversation, think of it as a phone conversation.
Yeah.
You can't see their body language. You have to go off of their tone and what they say. And so that also can do it. You don't have to necessarily always rely on body language, because if you spend every time you see someone, you spend like 2 sentences describing their body language every time, it's going to slow down your story a lot. So you only want to do that when they really need to pick up on the signal of what's going on. Otherwise, throwing in the dialogue different, I call them biased words, but words like, idiot or amazing, something that has a positive or negative connotation to it already. That will also help readers pick up on the mood.
Yeah. So again, you mentioned the phone call thing, or being on a phone call with a person. Like, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
What words does somebody use for you to pick up on their emotional state and what they're doing when you're on the phone with them?
Mm-hmm.
Another perspective might be if you're in the room with someone and they're on the phone with somebody else.
Yes.
What is their body language, their words, their facial expression, the tone of their voice, for you to pick up on what are they talking about and how do they feel about the conversation they're engaged in.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a great exercise to do too. To look at the character that way and be like, okay, I'm not in this scene, but by observing alone, how do I think? Which you can do that in real life if you want to have some practice at it, like listen, as your family member or a friend is talking on the phone, and just kind of like watch them, because they're not going to be paying attention to you, they're on the phone. And you can kind of see like, how are they holding themselves? Are they pacing? Are they talking quickly, slowly? That kind of thing.
Or just go follow people around in the mall.
I mean, you could do that too. I mean, yes, you can be a little creepy about it, but
But no, that could totally be like, again, you probably don't want to get the cops called on you for being like some creepo.
No, not
But
necessarily.
go try sitting at a food court
Mm-hmm.
and then observe people from a distance and try to determine without, like, maybe you can't even hear what they're saying, but you can see what their interactions with each other.
Yeah.
And take down notes of how would you describe how they're reacting to each other.
Exactly.
The mom who has 4 bags of stuff, and they've obviously been to 7 different stores, and she has 3 different shoes, and she has a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an 11-year-old, and the 2-year-old has made a mess with the ketchup, and the 11-year-old is whining for more fries.
Yep.
You can't, or maybe you don't even know. All you know is you can just see the expressions on all of their faces.
Yeah.
Describe their mood.
Exactly.
And then also, you will also come across a lot of people talking on the phone.
Yes. Yep.
So again, in a covert manner.
Yes. Yeah. Always try to look like you're doing something else, or, you can look and then kind of like glance away and let yourself process it, because you can see something and not process it. But if you kind of like, okay, and then look, I'm going to look here and I'm going to look away. You can think, okay, in that split second, what did I think that person's emotion was and why? Like, okay, they were grimacing. Like, okay, they must have taken that food was sour or whatever. But like, how did I know they were grimacing? And you can start asking yourself these questions and get yourself thinking, and you'll get to where you can just look at someone for a couple seconds and process, how did I get that cue? How did I get that cue? And start putting that in your arsenal for later.
Yeah, it's interesting. Although I've never done any of those things.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I can picture it.
it's great to do.
You've never done any of them intentionally.
Intentionally, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, who doesn't look around the food court
Exactly.
and see the parent with the toddler, standing in line for McDonald's? You notice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't, a good practice is to internalize that and say, what am I seeing, so that I can use that later
Well,
to
even
describe.
right then, like whether you write it down, like how would I describe exactly what I'm seeing to create a scene?
Yes. Yeah. And once you start doing it, you start seeing these things, you get really excited and you're like, oh my goodness, I can throw in this cool tidbit and this cool tidbit. So you just got to be careful that you don't overdo it. You don't want to have paragraphs and paragraphs of description. But yeah, it'll give you a nice list to work with, and you can just pull 1 or 2 out anytime you need it and go from
And if
there.
you get really excited about doing it at the mall, That's when you get the cops called on you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or at least the security that's
Or at
on
least
the,
security.
the Segway, you know.
The
Yeah.
segue, yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, if that's too intimidating, you can always, like you said, look at, you're looking at Tombstone. You can look at movies. I mean, it's probably not going to be quite as genuine because they're actors. They're paid to look a certain way, try to master certain emotions. But that's a good baseline if you're too intimidated. People watch at first. Or you can always read books as well. There's a book called The Emotional Thesaurus, and a lot of people love it. It's I think it's two women that wrote it. I can't remember what their names are right now, but they just went through and they're like, okay, here's an emotion, and here's all these cues of how it could look that way, and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of writers find that really helpful because they want all these, okay, how do I portray this? How do I portray that? My only caution with that is like anything you learn from a book or even from your people watching time is you don't want to be repetitive. So if you're constantly relying like on those clenched fists or whatever, people are going to call you out on it because it gets repetitive and tiring. So you got to make sure you change it up. So you got to constantly be people watching to get new clues. Kind of thing.
And that's one of the reasons I asked about using simile or metaphor or even personification, where can you figure out a way to describe someone's emotions in terms of, whether their body language, what they're physically doing, how they're physically reacting, the tenor of their voice, in terms of something relatable to your audience.
Yeah.
The screech of an owl or the like the coiled snake or the flexed muscles of a cat before it leapt, or even a landslide or a waterfall or an earthquake.
Yes. Yeah, I think the key is just to make sure you balance whatever you do. Like you don't want all your descriptions to be compared to something else. You don't want your descriptions to be body language. You don't want your descriptions to be tone. Like you cycle it through so it always has that new feel to it for readers.
Even like when someone says their face was a blank slate, like there's ways to interpret that, but I'm like, you can kind of picture what that is. Like the perfect poker player is zero expression, completely unreadable. So, but their face wasn't actually a blank slate because a slate is a chalkboard.
Yes.
So if you can figure out ways to do that, it just adds another layer and another tool to your tool belt.
Very good.
Okay. Well, any final thoughts or recommendations for anybody who might be delving into writing that you'd like to share?
So no, that's pretty much it. Just trying to be conscientious. I do have, almost forgot about this. I have this book. This is what I started with. It's called The Definitive Book of Body Language. It's by Alan and Barbara Pease. And it is a really good book for beginners if you want to look at kind of body language, the difference between males and females, all that kind of stuff. It's a good starting spot for people who want to pick something else. Of course, The Emotional Thesaurus is also good. It's written by writers for writers. So if you want something that's just bullet points and you don't really want to understand how to study body language, you can do that. But just kind of start out with those and then see where you can go from there.
Okay. Well, good information, good tips.
Yeah. It was nice being on here.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
And without being creepy, go study people.
Yes.
If you're going to write about people, you got to know people. So
You do. Yes.
okay. Well, thanks for joining us today, Liz. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening. And until next time, go in good spirits. Thanks for listening to the Creators Guild podcast. Don't forget to get your copy of A Flight from Shadows, available on Amazon. While you're there, please rate it and give it a review. If you like the Creators Guild, please like and subscribe, and make sure to share it with your friends. Until next time, go in good spirits.